Hey, folks, the man with the pinky ring and the New York thing, forget about it. Bad Brad Berkwitt. As I always say and always will, it's about moving humanity forward. All right, folks, remember, every act of kindness is a little love. Hey, folks, the man with the pinky ring and the New York thing, forget about it. Bad Brad Berkwitt. And you're watching another episode of the Bad Brad Berkwitt Show on the Ringside Report web TV channel. Now, make sure you follow me on Twitter at BadBradRSR. Again, that's at BadBradRSR. And check out my great writing team on ringsidereport.com. Well, folks, today we got an early morning show. Oy vey, did I have to get up early for this one? But that's what I do on the Bad Brad Berkwitt Show because I bring them to you. This gentleman is now coming on the show for the third time, and we're going to talk current events / hot topics for the viewers so you know what's going on in the world. This gentleman is the host of the popular show Justice Matters with the one and only Glenn Kirschner. So make sure you subscribe to his channel as well because, as he always says, justice matters. So without further ado, let's get into this hot topic current event show with the one, the only, my friend, Glenn Kirschner. Forget about it. Well, Glenn, good morning and welcome back to the show.
Hey, Brad, how are you?
All right, hanging in there. Let's get right into some hot topics. A lot of people waiting to hear what you have to say. Let's start out with, if you would, let's talk about Trump's statement about Mike Pence should have been hung.
Yeah, you know, all of the evidence in aggregate proves one thing. Trump equals treason. End of equation. You don't need to be a mathematician. Treason in our federal law is defined as somebody who owes an allegiance to the United States and levies war against the United States. You know, I think there is a strong case to be made that what Donald Trump did on January 6th and around January 6th, but most pointedly on January 6th, was he waged war against the United States for more than 3 hours. Think about it. He is the one who incited, inspired, enraged the mob and directed them to go to the Capitol and fight like hell, lying to them about their vote being stolen, which is what helps supply evidence of his criminal intent. They obeyed his commands. They went to the Capitol, they fought, they destroyed, they hunted for our elected officials, and they were chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." And a little bit of foreshadowing here, Brad. I suspect we might hear some things beginning on June 9th when the January 6th committee goes live with public hearings, that there were plants in the audience that were sent there to start that chant, "Hang Mike Pence," just as he would have plants in his audience at his rallies to start certain chants. So stay tuned for more about that. But as they were chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," as they were trying to stop the certification of Joe Biden's win, Donald Trump was sitting in the White House dining room, watching it, rewinding to, quote, the good parts. I guess that's when, you know, the Trump supporters were giving the Capitol Police a real good beatdown. Maybe that's what Donald Trump believed were the good parts. And people were streaming into the White House dining room, pleading with him to stop the attack, to call off his dogs. And I thought what was most telling was some testimony before the J6 committee that was disclosed by Mike Pence's national security advisor, Keith Kellogg, former military general. I don't remember what branch precisely, but he said, you know, Mark Meadows went in and tried to get him to stop. I tried to get him to stop. Kellyanne Conway tried to get him to stop. Ivanka tried to get him to stop. And, you know, we sent Ivanka back in a second time because she can be pretty persuasive with her father. And she couldn't get him to stop his attack. On top of that, we just learned, now going directly to your question, that Donald Trump was angry. He was complaining that they were whisking Mike Pence to safety, which is really odd because part of the dirty scheme to stop the Biden certification was to delay the count of the Electoral College votes as long as possible. So we might say to ourselves, well, whisking Mike Pence away to safety would delay matters, right? Because he couldn't be there to count the votes. But, Trump's true nature came through. He wanted Mike Pence hanged. And after he expressed anger that Mike Pence was being whisked away to safety, he said, maybe Mike Pence should be hanged. And that was information reported to the J6 committee, Brad, by, among others, one of Mark Meadows' own aides. So this is not, the crazy left-wing radicals making stuff up. This is Trump's inner circle providing this kind of information about him. What Donald Trump did was wage war, levy war against the United States after having taken an oath swearing allegiance to the United States. That constitutes the crime of treason.
And I agree. And I'll add to that talking point, Donald Trump Jr. was walking around with his cell phone recording all of this. And Kimberly, as I call her, Garfoyle, whatever her name is, was dancing behind him. Trump was looking at the monitors. Jared Kushner was right next to him. Ivanka was right next to him. And Donald Trump Jr. thought it was like a frat party. It was a lot of fun watching what was going on. In your heart, I believe this. In your heart, do you believe, Glenn, that if they would have got Mike Pence that day, they would have hung him?
I think they would have attacked him, beaten him the way they did our many brave Capitol Police officers. And I don't know. I mean, you can't predict. You can't look into the mind of the kind of people who are inspired to attack our own democracy because they listen mindlessly to a criminal president. I can't look into their minds and say what they would have done.
Okay. And one other talking point on that, Pence was scared to get in the car with the Secret Service. Is that true reporting? Is that factual reporting?
I've heard that reported. I think it's being reported accurately. I think we're going to see for ourselves beginning on June 9 with these public hearings, which I'll tell you, I can't wait. I mean, I have great respect for Representative Jamie Raskin, and he's been teasing us for a long time saying, listen, you don't understand what we've learned from these 1,000+ witnesses that you're about to see beginning on June 9 will, quote, blow the roof off the House. I take him at his word. So will it move the needle with respect to some of the MAGA crew? Probably not, but that's beside the point. This is something we must see with our own eyes. And thereafter, my position is the Department of Justice must prosecute the crimes that we are about to see presented to us.
Okay. Let's talk Kevin McCarthy. You had a funny line. I think this was your line. Better buckle up, Buttercup, that he's in trouble. Talk about Kevin McCarthy, if you would, Glenn.
Yeah, buckle up, Buttercup. I've said that. Look, you can take the kid out of Jersey, but you can't take Jersey out of the kid. So he better buckle up because it not only, think about this. He has evidence of Donald Trump's crimes. That is inarguable, beyond dispute. He has evidence relevant to the January 6th committee's investigation of the insurrection and what Donald Trump did before, during, and after. And rather than providing that information to Congress and by extension, providing it to the American people, he's concealing it. And not only is he just concealing it, Brad, he's willing to commit a crime himself, contempt of Congress, in his determination to cover up Donald Trump's crimes, not to snitch on Trump. Let's call it what it is. And when you conceal federal crimes that have been committed, that are, let me use our fancy legal speak, cognizable in a court of the United States, and I spit that out for a reason, it becomes important. When you have evidence of the crimes of another against the United States and you conceal it, you're committing a crime. You're committing the crime of what's called misprision of a felony. You hide Donald Trump's felonies, you're committing the crime of misprision, which is a fancy word for cover-up. You're committing a second crime, accessory after the fact. That's slightly different. Misprision of a felony, the cover-up, requires that you conceal crimes of another that are cognizable in the courts of the United States. Accessory after the fact says if you have knowledge of crimes against the United States and you assist the perpetrator in getting away with them, in avoiding accountability, that's accessory after the fact. So they're very similar crimes, but they come at the problem from two different angles. And let me tell you why I use the term in the federal code of cognizable in a court of the United States. Nobody can argue that Donald Trump hasn't committed a crime cognizable in the courts of the United States because a federal judge handed down a ruling. David Carter in California, Judge Carter, handed down a ruling that Donald Trump, together with John Eastman, committed 2 federal crimes against the United States. So a federal judge has already cognized them. It's a word. I looked it up. I'm from Jersey. I gotta look stuff up. He's already determined by a preponderance of the evidence, more likely than not, 51%, that Donald Trump committed the federal felony of obstructing the congressional proceeding, the certification of Joe Biden's win, and a second federal felony of conspiracy to defraud the United States by trying to overturn the election. A judge has already ruled, which, once that ruling came out, Brad, I'm like, okay, a federal judge has said Donald Trump committed these crimes. How can that not move the Department of Justice to indict him for those crimes? Let me tell you, this is the criminal justice system stood on its head. Usually, crime is committed, DOJ investigates, indictments are handed down, and then later in the process is when judges get involved and talk about the crime that has been committed, that's been indicted by the Department of Justice. This is, the judiciary, I believe, being really frustrated at the pace or inaction of the Department of Justice, but I still believe it's coming. And we had good news with a subpoena of Peter Navarro just yesterday. I think that story broke. Yeah. We're moving in the right direction, even if we're moving a little bit too slowly.
Okay. Let's talk about Kellyanne Conway. You and I had kind of talked offline about this. You're fascinated about her saying, I guess she wrote it in her book, I'm assuming, about an unsolicited blanket pardon. Is that where it came from?
Yeah, it was quoted in the Washington Post by Ashley Parker, who did something of a book review or a takedown of Kellyanne's book, if you will. And the quote was that Kellyanne reported. Now, let's assume it's Kellyanne's book, so it may be filled with alternative facts. We don't know if this is the real deal or not, but let's assume Kellyanne was writing accurately what happened during her time in the Trump administration. She said near the end of his term, Trump kind of ambles up to her and says, "Hey, honey," that's a quote. I'm not throwing that word in cavalierly. "Hey, honey, would you like a pardon?" Kellyanne said, "Mr. President, do you know something I don't know?" I assume that to mean she doesn't believe she committed any crimes, so she wouldn't need a pardon. And he basically said, and I'm paraphrasing now, no. Everybody needs one. Everybody, they're going to go after everybody. Everybody needs a pardon. You want one? And she said, "I politely decline." Let's assume all that to be true, Brad. What does that tell you? If he's ambling around the White House, handing out pardons like Halloween candy, unsolicited, do you think there's any chance he didn't sign a pardon for Don Jr. and Ivanka and Jared and Rudy and himself? You believe that? I'm sure Donald Trump will sell you any number of New York City bridges, and he'll probably throw in a couple of tunnels, right? He gave everybody pardons. I would bet the farm on it. So the next question becomes, what are the consequences of that? Because I've been talking about something I call pocket pardons. I don't know if I coined that phrase. I may have, but I borrowed from our prosecutorial practice when it comes to immunity. When we grant people immunity, which forces them to testify, even if they otherwise had a Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, because the immunity extinguishes their right against self-incrimination, because the immunity says these statements can't be used against you, so you can't plead the Fifth, right? It's what prosecutors do when they really want to get at the testimony that somebody has, but that person pleads the Fifth, and we can't violate that, but we can grant them immunity to extinguish the privilege. So And now my train is off track.
Trump offering
consequences. The consequences of these pardons. We won't know if they have these pardons. We now know Kellyanne was offered one. We won't know until they pull them out of their back pocket, right? Because there is nothing in the Constitution, people need to know, that says for a pardon to be valid, it must be publicly announced. There is nothing that requires a pardon to be publicly announced. It generally is, because we have an Office of the Pardon Attorney at the Department of Justice, and non-criminal presidents follow proper procedures. Trump doesn't, right? So if these people are prosecuted, and I believe, for example, Don Jr. will be, and I believe Rudy Giuliani will be for their crimes, they may try to pull out that pardon and say, not so fast, look what I got from Pop, look what I got from my client, if you're Rudy, Donald. And then we have to fight what I believe are corruptly delivered pardons in court to try to invalidate them. We can't let Trump get away with pardoning his co-conspirators like he did Roger Stone, because that's a recipe for a dictatorship. So I'm really interested in the pardon issue and to see how it plays out in the future. But there will be robust debates, I think, in the coming months about the implications of secret pardons.
Okay. I had Pam Keith on my show. I'm sure you know who that is, on Sunday. And she brought your name up. And
yeah, Pam's great.
Yeah, there was 3 people that she said she would have liked to have seen be the Attorney General, and you were one of them. And she said, and I want to get your opinion if you agree or disagree or whatever. She said if you had been the Attorney General by now, 'cause she's not a fan of Garland, and she thinks at this point that President Biden should fire him. But if you would have been the AG, and all these months have went by now, she feels that you would have brought cases already against these people.
Yeah, I am not prepared to turn on Merrick Garland or my many friends and former colleagues at the Department of Justice. I think they have an almost impossibly difficult task, but nobody said governing was going to be easy. So you need to take care of this. I do think charges are coming. I do see indications that the Department of Justice continues to work its way up the insurrection ladder, starting with the foot soldiers of the insurrection, working its way up to the command structure of the insurrection, as reinforced by the recent subpoena of Navarro seeking all communications with Donald Trump. Tells me they are directly investigating Donald Trump's culpability for the insurrection. But here's where I part ways with the Department of Justice. There are so many crimes that occurred years ago, committed by Donald Trump, that really have nothing to do with the insurrection. Now, let me add a caveat. They have everything to do with Trump wanting to acquire power unlawfully and retain power unlawfully. So you can go back to 2015 and 16, and you can say, well, look, the crimes that Donald Trump committed in a conspiracy with Michael Cohen to steal the election, the campaign finance crimes, paying off playmates and porn stars, urging Russia to corruptly, indeed criminally, help him in the election, which he did. You can certainly look back at those and say, you know what? That is all part of the same theme of Donald Trump trying to acquire the presidency criminally and then retain the presidency criminally right up to this day, right? So I could see an investigative team at the Department of Justice saying that's why we're investigating it all under the same umbrella, and we're ultimately going to bring charges for everything that we think properly resides under that umbrella. I don't know if that's what they're doing. I have a feeling, it feels to me like they're letting the campaign finance crimes go and not prosecuting them, like they're letting the extortion and bribery of President Zelensky go and not prosecuting it. Those are crimes as sure as you and I are talking here, Brad. They're letting the obstruction of justice crimes that Bob Mueller documented in Volume 2 of the Mueller report go, and they're not prosecuting them. I hope that's not the case. I hope I'm wrong. I hope they are viewing this as one big criminal conspiracy headed up by Donald Trump. And if they are, no statute of limitations have yet expired. So they could roll all of those crimes into one big old indictment. Let's not get our hopes up. and I'm not peddling false hope. But so if I were a prosecutor and I was determined to just bring the insurrection conspiracy case on its own, the answer is yes. I would have already indicted Donald Trump for those crimes that he committed 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago. Those should have been brought. I will never understand why the Department of Justice has not, and if they don't ever bring them, I will never understand why they didn't charge the felony obstruction of justice counts that Bob Mueller meticulously documented in volume 2 of the Trump-Russia report, and for which he famously testified he can be indicted the day he leaves office. Mm-hmm. That's where I part ways with today's Department of Justice.
Okay. And one other thing on that talking point that you're pretty much the only one I've ever heard bring it up, and you've said it pretty much on each show that you've been on, this is your third one with me, crimes against humanity.
Yeah. You know, Donald Trump, take it from this old homicide prosecutor. Donald Trump is criminally responsible for causing avoidable COVID deaths. There are low levels of homicide liability. Some jurisdictions call them criminally negligent homicide. Some jurisdictions, like in DC, we call them involuntary manslaughter, but they're all the same crime. It's that when you have a duty and you violate that duty, and like a duty to the American people to speak the truth about a deadly pandemic, you violate that duty and your conduct is likely to result in death or serious bodily injury, you've committed a low level of homicide, criminally negligent homicide, involuntary manslaughter. Donald Trump did that, and we can prove it. And if I were still a federal prosecutor in DC, I would have presented evidence to the grand jury in support of involuntary manslaughter charges against Donald Trump. Those are crimes against humanity. And I don't know why no prosecutors, because we suffered avoidable COVID deaths in all 50 states and in the territories, why no prosecutors have been brave enough to take that leap, because the evidence is there. It's not for a lack of evidence. It would be challenging and we might lose, but that's okay. There's no shame in bringing a righteous criminal prosecution and losing. There's nothing but shame in refusing to bring a righteous prosecution for fear of losing. And that's what I feel like is going on.
Okay. The average person that I talk to when it comes to Trump with the Georgia thing, just all the different things, Alvin Bragg, whether he's screwing up in New York, all these cases, all this stuff, where the one where I think it was James in New York, they were fining him $10,000 a day. The judge said, we're going to stop. He's got to pay $110,000. The average person that I talk to on the street, white, black, doesn't matter who they are, they say, if it was you and I, Brad, we would have to go and at least go in front of the judge and be, is the word depose or whatever it is. Why is it that Donald Trump seems to get away with not stalling and pushing off and not having to go and testify? And not just Donald Trump, Don Jr. and some of these other ones. I know Don Jr. went in front of the January 6th committee, but they play games with everybody that they talk to, that it appears. So the average person on the street says, if that was you or me, we'd be under the jailhouse already. This guy doesn't even have to show up and sit his fat ass down. I mean, what do we say to these people that are just beside themselves with this?
We speak the truth and we tell them you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. Plain and simple.
That's
you can't explain the inexplicable. You know, I spent 30 years standing in front of juries trying to explain why somebody committed a crime. Let's take murder, for example. I can never adequately explain to the satisfaction of a thinking person, a reasonable person, why one human takes the life of another. And so, but what I tell my juries, Brad, and what I tell anybody who asks these questions over and over, heck, I ask these questions over and over. Why aren't they being held accountable? Because it was me, it was you, it was anybody else, our ass would be in jail. I try to draw from my jury experience. I had to tell my juries, please don't fall into the trap of looking for a reasonable explanation, a good answer, an acceptable reason why somebody kills somebody else, because you won't find one. And if we needed to prove why somebody acts corruptly or criminally, to your satisfaction, if we had to give you a reasonable explanation or we couldn't hold them accountable, we would fail. Because I use that by way of analogy. There's no reasonable explanation for why Donald Trump has not been held accountable for his crimes his whole life.
Yes.
There are some things that I think we can all draw on, given our common sense and our real world experience. He pays people off. He runs into, he commits crimes in a way that is savvy enough, kind of like a mob boss. He insulates himself. It's savvy enough that it makes it really challenging for prosecutors to build a criminal case against him. Some prosecutors are scared. They're afraid of losing. You know, listen, I was a prosecutor, both military and civilian. I was a prosecutor in both trial courts and appellate courts. I was a prosecutor in state and federal jurisdictions. And what I saw in my career, some prosecutors were brave and bold and did not fear losing and did not fear public criticism. I've been criticized mightily over the years in the press for taking certain prosecutorial actions or losing cases, but I was never afraid of it. You know, I was never afraid to do my job for fear of failure or criticism. But there's a reason, Brad, federal prosecutors run around beating their chests, some of them saying, I never lost the case. It's because you never took a hard case to court, right? The other thing, and I don't want to do a deep dive on the dual sort of responsibilities of the sovereigns, the states versus the feds. But here's the thing. Anytime somebody commits a federal crime, they almost invariably commit a state crime as well, right? Because you violate federal law and state law. For example, if you're a tax cheat, tax fraud, you're violating federal tax laws, you're violating your state's tax laws. And if you're in New York and you're Alan Weisselberg, you're violating your city tax laws too. And here is the thing that people don't realize about the feds. If we think a case is weak or not worth taking for some reason, what do? We kick it to the states, make it the states' problems. I had a conversation with my friend, Claire McCaskill, who was a state prosecutor before she was in Congress. And she said, you know, we were getting these cases all the time that the feds should have taken, but they wouldn't. So they kicked it to the states. And frankly, you look at the resources that the feds have versus the states, and the feds have a ton of resources as compared to the states, which have far fewer resources to police and prosecute. So I didn't intend for this to be a session where I beat up on DOJ, but these are the realities that I know from being on the inside. So I think that plays into why nobody has charged Donald Trump. Nobody wants to be the first prosecutor to charge a former president. But once we break that barrier, and everybody will want to be the second.
Right. And you've said that. You've said it every time you come on. When right now you have an all-time high. Now, social media, of course, pushes it in our faces, but you have churches that have people screaming, "Let's go, Brandon." You have preachers that are pushing Trump. Why doesn't, and I put this in, correct me if I'm wrong, President Biden is the president, his administration. How come they don't finally go after some of these mega churches or even the smaller churches and take away their tax exemption from them, because they're pushing political agendas? And as you know, they're not supposed to do that, but they're getting away with it. How come we don't see that happen?
You know, this also goes in the bucket of there is no good reason. But I think what these things are, Brad, is they're political calculations, right? It's all about what base will I energize to go after me, maybe I lose my reelection bid if I try to take tax exempt status away from churches. I think if churches are being run as businesses, and many of them are, they ought to be taxed.
Yeah.
I never understood how that was a violation of the Establishment Clause. The United States shall establish no church. Well, taxing the churches that have established themselves and they're making huge profits and they're engaged in political activity, they should be paying taxes like you and me.
Yeah.
Right. So, but I fear that, and I don't want to necessarily get into the latest mass shooting in Texas, but I fear that government inaction is so often a product of a political calculation about whether I'm going to get reelected or not. And that's what just disappoints me to my core, because it really should be more about do the right thing and let the chips fall.
Yeah. Yeah. Pam Q said the same thing. She said the same, because like I said, President Biden, I'm a supporter, but he's the current president, and presidents before, they talk about this. It's, my thing is, don't talk about it if you're not going to do it. It's aggravating because it's like you said, it boils down to it's the right thing to do. And they're getting bolder and bolder and bolder since Trump. I'm not saying it didn't happen before, but since Trump and after Trump, it's ridiculous. I know you're not a political guy, and I don't know if you can really answer this question if you want to, but I got to ask you, if the DOJ doesn't, I'm not saying it'd be the end of the cases, but if the DOJ, this is going to be June 1st tomorrow, if the DOJ doesn't bring something before the midterm elections, in my opinion, the people, and I know you're pretty much apolitical because you said on my show that you voted for both parties. Okay, so I understand that. But to me, if nothing at least comes out in I guess you say indictment or whatever, something from the DOJ, I think people are going to say, you know what, I'm not coming out and voting in November, and it would be the Democratic side. I'm done. I'm not saying do that because I'm going to vote no matter what. But it's going to cause people to say, you know what, this system is effed up. I'm tired of it. I've been dealing with this. We got COVID for 2 years. We got this fool at these rallies, Trump. We got these people that won't come off this Trump train, January 6th. And now nothing is done after the public hearings. You think that's going to affect the midterms, whether either way?
Yeah, that's a great question. And let me first say, please don't let your frustration keep you from the polls, regardless of who you vote for. Please, 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 because then we're giving up all hope. And there are people out there trying to kill our hope and our optimism and the promise of a better future. So please don't give them the satisfaction of making you so angry, upset, and frustrated that you just blow off the polls. That is not a solution. So I am of two minds when it comes to your question about shouldn't DOJ indict somebody before the midterms. There are two things at play there. One, there is a tradition, there is a norm in the Department of Justice that we will try to do nothing overtly in a law enforcement capacity within about 60 days of an election, because we don't want to, quote, interfere in the election. We don't want to be perceived as being political at the Department of Justice. That is a quaint little Norman tradition that I think we need to walk deep into the woods and shoot dead. Here's why. We have insurrectionists in Congress running for re-election. Do not give those people an election holiday from being held accountable for their crimes in the 60-day run-up to their attempt to be re-elected and continue to try to destroy our democracy from the inside. Please set aside that norm, that tradition, because you follow it to the danger of our democracy. And that proves that norm and tradition doesn't work anymore. Now, let me add, don't bring indictments for political reasons. Bring them for righteous reasons, because they're supported by the facts and the law, and you're fighting for the American people, and you're fighting for our democracy. So I don't care if the election is next week. If you have enough to indict an insurrectionist who's sitting in Congress and running for re-election today, do it today. Don't wait until after that insurrectionist gets re-elected and gets even a stronger foothold in our government and can destroy our government from within. Don't do it. So, I know I feel like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. Don't do anything as a law enforcement organization, FBI, DOJ, to interfere in an election, but don't give the bad actors an election holiday either.
Right.
Now, if I had to bet $1, that's my betting limit, $1. I am not a high roller on whether we will see indictments before the midterms. I'm going to bet $1 that we will, because I think DOJ is getting closer and closer and closer. And I think we're going to begin to see some indictments, maybe not of the highest up politicians, but of the Scavinos, Navarros, maybe even the Meadows of the world. Meadows, for the last 170 some odd days, has been pending indictment. He's been referred for a criminal indictment for contempt of Congress. And that is sitting in DOJ's lap. We're still waiting to see if Mark Meadows will be indicted.
Okay. When you were saying that, I was thinking Comey. I'm sure probably you were thinking along the same line when Comey did that with Hillary Clinton. Fair statement or not a fair statement, Glenn, that this current crop of Republicans and the crimes that they have committed and Trump makes Nixon and Watergate look like choir boys?
Yeah, I say that the crimes committed by Donald Trump and his co-conspirators to kill our democracy, it makes the Watergate offenses look like shoplifting. There is just no comparison. And that was a time when the Republican Party still had a core of patriotism. And when the tapes of Richard Nixon's crimes were revealed, they marched on the White House. They said, Mr. President, you're done. I mean, but for Cheney and Kinzinger, there are very few Republicans who still have a core of patriotism inside them. They're all about self-preservation, and they're willing to hitch their wagon to a criminal president to preserve their own standing.
Yes. And the left gets aggravated with me sometimes, and I stand by what I say because I try to be fair and down the middle. I do not believe that whether you like President Reagan's policies or Papa Bush or even Junior Bush or Jack Kemp, Bob Dole, any of these guys would have tolerated the BS from these people. And you've never seen, you got me just only by a couple years, you've never seen Republican candidates. You could say we could talk about Democrats on another thing, but the Republican candidates running, as you just said, on the coattails of a traitor, a liar, a misogynist, a narcissist, and a racist, and double down on Trump. And actually, some of them, not all of them, because he didn't do as good as he thought he was going to do, and still win at the cost of our democracy. It blows it's treason. It just blows my mind. The last question I want to ask you is a 180 off of everything we've talked about this morning. What does Glenn Kirschner do? Because I know how much you care about this country. I talked to Frank Fagluzzi, who, by the way, folks, shameless plug, next month, June 17th, I've got Glenn, Frank Fagluzzi, Jack Hughes, the lead singer of Wang Chung, and actor Jim Pittock coming on for a Moving Humanity Forward panel. What do you do, Glenn, to decompress or walk away from the many times you have to go on with Zerlina, I think it's Zerlina, and the different shows that you do? And what do you do in private time that I know you hit the heavy bag? I would still think you hit the heavy bag and probably knock it off the chain. But what do you do?
You know, I do a lot of little things. So one thing I will do is just sit and look at green space. I mean, there's something about sitting quietly and enjoying nature, green space, the birds, we've got fox and deer and rabbits running through our backyard all the time. I will literally sit and enjoy green space. I've got a vegetable garden. Probably most importantly, I've got my first grandchild. Her name is Paz Laura. I spent much of yesterday with her, blew up the baby pool and we just played out back. There is nothing more revitalizing than spending time with children, any children, but your own grandchild. I've got 6 kids, 5 girls and a boy. But I didn't know what this grandparent thing was all about until Paz came along. And boy, I am smitten with my granddaughter. And then it's a lot of physical activity. It's not only hitting the bag, but going to the gym. I used to push heavy weights around. I refuse to even attempt that anymore. I'm in my 60s. I don't need to, bench press 365 anymore. Yes, that was my best bench when I was in college. So now everything is lightweight work and aerobic work. And I spend time talking with people. See, this is very fulfilling for me. There are so many people experiencing such high levels of anxiety and depression and desperation and fear, Brad, because of the issues that you and I are talking about. And they feel like they can't have an impact, and they feel like they don't understand what's going on. As you said, because if it were them, they'd be locked up.
Yes.
And high government officials are committing crimes in plain sight and they're not being locked up. It leaves us all feeling helpless. I will sit and talk with anybody. I don't care if it's an auditorium of 1,000. I don't care if it's on with Lawrence O'Donnell. I'm going to say an audience of 1 million. I don't know what MSNBC's numbers are, or 2 people in a coffee shop. And I'll spend an hour just talking, learning from them, and trying to answer their questions and concerns and help reduce their level of anxiety. Can I finish with this starfish on the beach story, which a lot of people have heard, but I wish we would all pick up a starfish. So, and I heard Senator Booker retell this story. I've heard it many times over the years, but I think it kind of sums up not only where we are, but where, when it comes to moving humanity forward, where I hope we can all go together, right? 2 people on a beach. There's 1 million starfish that have washed up because of the tide, and they're all dying on the beach. And so there is one guy at the far end of the beach, another guy at the other end, and one of the 2 is kind of taking a few steps, and then he looks down, he picks up a starfish, and he throws it back into the water, and he keeps on walking. A couple steps later, another starfish, throws it into the water. The guy at the other end of the beach kind of meets up with him and says, dude, what are you doing? You can't save. Look, there's millions of them. You can't save all these starfish. And he bends down and he picks one up and he goes, yeah, but I can save this one.
Yeah.
Throws it into the ocean. If we all did that, Brad, we could make our country so much better.
Yeah. I agree.
All just engage in whatever way you can.
Yes.
Call your local chapter of Indivisible and ask what kind of help they need to move us forward, and then volunteer to do that. I don't care if it's 10 minutes once a week or, but if we all did that, it would not only help move us forward, it makes you feel better inside. Yes. It gives you an outlet. And it's not pointless or meaningless work. It's important to that one starfish or that one voter you reach. Mm-hmm. And again, left, right, and center. I've voted left, right, and independent. I've voted across the spectrum my whole life for people who I had confidence in were telling me the truth, were honest and decent, and were empathetic, and were inclusive and care, even if their policies weren't perfectly aligned with mine. Right. If you care about people, empathy is the single greatest asset any of us can have. So everybody pick up a starfish, throw it back in the water, and that's how we move humanity forward.
I agree. And I got to ask, because I didn't ask you last time, on the wall, what is that plaque, the hat?
So that is a Maryland State Trooper Stetson. Back in 2000, a Maryland State Trooper named Edward Totley was working as the undercover officer on an FBI Safe Streets task force, making huge cocaine buys. He was in an undercover FBI vehicle equipped with surveillance cameras. And the drug dealer, the target of the investigation, killed him in the cab of that vehicle on camera by shooting him once through the head. The defendant's name was Kofi Orleans Lindsay. I worked that case in federal court, the murder of a federal task force officer. It was a death penalty eligible case. I'm not a fan of the death penalty, but I wasn't a conscientious objector either as a prosecutor. So I worked death penalty cases both in the military and as a civilian prosecutor at the Department of Justice. I'm glad, I will say, that the defendant ended up pleading guilty to life without the possibility of release. And then Attorney General Ashcroft agreed to let us take the death penalty off the table because he would die in prison. After the end of that extraordinary case that I was honored to handle, the state of Maryland, the Maryland State Police made me an honorary state trooper. So they gave me the Stetson, they gave me a badge, and I couldn't be more proud of my work in that case 22 years ago. Wow,
what a story. May you rest in peace. All right, Glenn, I appreciate you coming on. Again, we'll see you June 17th. Keep doing what you're doing. I always tell you, you're always moving humanity forward. People have the utmost respect for you. Like I said, Pam Keith brought you up. If it was her choice, you'd be Attorney General right now. Oh, you know what? I got to ask you this. I know you probably could say, I don't know, Brad. But for S&G, if President Biden were to call you up tomorrow and personally say, Glenn, I would like to nominate you, I should say, because I just nomination process, for Attorney General, what would you do?
So first of all, that will never happen because I run my mouth too much and I'm way too candid with what I say, but I live by all of it. But if President Biden called me and asked me to be the dog catcher or the janitor, the custodian at the White House, what you say is, yes, Mr. President. That's always the answer.
Okay. All right. On that note, hey, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks again for coming on, and I'll see you next month, and we'll talk soon.
Great being with you, Brad, and thank you for what you do.
You're welcome. Take care. Hey, folks, the man with the pinky ring and the New York thing. Forget about it. Bad Brad Berkwitt. And you're watching another episode of the Bad Brad Berkwitt Show on the Ringside Report web TV channel. Now, make sure you follow me on Twitter at BadBradRSR. Again, that's at BadBradRSR. And check out my great writing team on ringsidereport.com. Well, folks, today we got an early morning show. Oy vey, did I have to get up early for this one? But that's what I do on the Bad Brad Berkwitt Show because I bring them to you. This gentleman is now coming on the show for the third time, and we're going to talk current events / hot topics for the viewers so you know what's going on in the world. This gentleman is the host of the popular show Justice Matters with the one and only Glenn Kirschner. So make sure you subscribe to his channel as well because, as he always says, justice matters. So without further ado, let's get into this hot topic current event show with the one, the only, my friend, Glenn Kirschner. Forget about it. Thank you for watching the Bad Brad Berkwitt Show. Please follow, subscribe, leave comments, forget about it, and move humanity forward.